right, hi everyone. Now you guys can hear me, so welcome. My name is AndreaFishy, but you can just call me Fishy. That's usually what my friends call me. And I'm gonna go over how to tell your stories through character expressions. So, a little bio about myself. I am American Peruvian, and I am a comic artist and illustrator and the creator of Damselfish in Distress on Webtoon Canvas. I have an MA in illustration, and I've been working on my comics for about 3 years now. My specialty is drawing marine creatures and environments, but I also love focusing on exaggeration and strong characterization in my comics specifically. So my series is called Damselfish in Distress, and it's a comedy underwater ocean adventure about an anxious damselfish mermaid who encounters a mysterious key that binds her to a worldwide death race game. And the goal is to reach a legendary light tower and find paradise from a dangerous and degrading world. She meets a lot of weirdos on her journey and befriends some of them, but mostly makes enemies who want to steal her key away from her. It has a lot of themes about anxiousness and finding empowerment, but it's also very lighthearted, and humor plays a big part in my story writing and characterization. For example, my main character's name is Pesky, and she is timid and shy and avoids confrontation. And you can instantly get that impression from her posture and her facial expressions. Shin is one of the side characters. He's the opposite of Pesky, where he's outgoing and adventurous and always craving action. So there's a clash of personalities there where he's always up for a good fight, but she would rather choose safer options, and that leaves for a lot of opportunities for humorous interactions. So that's a little bit about my series. So why does this all matter? Exaggeration is important because visuals are our best tool to attract readers, and we want to keep readers' attention for as much as we can. And specifically for comics on Webtoon, the average reader scrolls through your comic episodes within minutes and spends only a few seconds on each panel. So we want to do our best to hold their attention for as long as we can. And a good way to attract attention is with exaggeration and good character acting. These are a range of examples from Damselfish. I love exaggeration. I think it breathes life into characters and makes people stop and look a little bit longer at your work and think like, wow, this guy's face is crazy, or yeah, I relate to whatever this girl's face and whatever she's feeling. Whatever makes someone to stop and look at your art longer is going to be beneficial, because we want to make an impact and we want our work to be memorable. So here's a little outline of what I'll be talking about and covering. These are just the things that I've come to think about when I'm doing like the planning stages and early sketching stages, when I draw my illustrations, comics, characters, anything. And when the first thing I want to cover is facial expressions. So the first thing I notice is the eyes. Now the examples on the okay side aren't meant to be seen as like bad, because they are fine and they work, but I want to compare them to the samples on this side to show how you can push things a little bit further to make more of an impact. So on this side, the eyes are widened, the pupils are smaller, there's little details in rage, like adding these wrinkles and making some features asymmetrical, like the eyebrows, will just get across what you want to say a little bit easier. Here are some examples from my comic. In this first image, Pesky and Sai are obviously disturbed by whatever's in front of them. And I left Shin here with his neutral expression because other characters that are not reacting as intensely will help bring more attention to these expressions. Like Shin is neutral, and it's weird because they are obviously disturbed by something, and why isn't he also reacting that way? For this one, Saifo's rage is all in his eyes, and it's humorous rage, and it's clear from the thick eyebrows and the wide eyes. And I left this, I forgot to erase this little note, but yeah, that's the same energy here. And for excitement, on Shin, the eyes are more dilated and has a sparkle effect because he's looking at something passionate. And his mouth here also helps to complete the expression, but it's mostly the eyes. And actually, with mouths, that's the second thing that I notice in a facial expression. So I mostly find that tilting mouths and making them wider helps with stronger emotions. And these small mouths work great for softer expressions or calmer moments. But for intense feelings, I like to just stretch them out and go and pull them to be a little wider. And so here are some of my exaggerated mouths. I'll admit I sometimes maybe go a little overboard because I just enjoy seeing how far I can push the emphasis, because I really want my readers to feel what I'm trying to portray. But yeah, I think it's important to like really get your impact across. Like over here for Pesky, there is no doubt that she is scared and disturbed and about to activate her flight response. And it looks like they're both yelling at her, and she's just like, no. All right. And for Shin, he is obviously so upset that his mouth is stretching past his face. And Lepto is the same, only for malicious excitement. And you can tell it's threatening from the sharp teeth. And yeah, sometimes it is a bit much, but he's a little bit of a special case because his species of fish has crazy extendo jaws in real life. But I took advantage of that to really go insane with his expressions. And now when we combine them, we get these nifty little faces. Stretching features will make it easier to exaggerate and put emphasis on whichever emotion you want to go for. So on this side, there is wider eyes, bigger mouths, and a little more asymmetry with the eyebrows compared to this side. And the mouth placement is a little tilted. And with less intense emotions, you wouldn't have to push them you wouldn't have to like push them to this far, or if you're going for a less intense level of disturbed, then this works fine. So, it's a case-by-case basis. Use whatever you feel you need for the moment. And whatever is like, relevant to what is happening to your character. These are a few different variations of combining what I just went over. So here, in the first one, she is disturbed. So her eyes are wide and the pupils are small. But for this example, her mouth is tiny instead of super stretched like before, but she's obviously still uncomfortable. And Louv is angry, maybe not as ragey as the other examples, but you can tell it's an angry emotion from her eyes, the snarl, the body posture, and since she is squishing and crumpling this piece of poster with suppressed fury. And for Shin, I was going I was going for more of a psycho excited here because he's always ready for some violence. So his pupils aren't dilated, but he's still got that maniac look with the open mouth that's yelling. So I wanted to point out some examples of a character without a mouth, like Levin, where you can tell what he's feeling just by his eyes and body posture. So he's an octopus, we don't see his mouth. You can tell, but you can still tell when he's annoyed, terrified, happy, or suspicious. Just from the eyebrows changing, the eye shape changing up a little bit, and specifically how his arms move. I was mentioning body posture a few times before because it's also important to think about that and take that into account as well, especially if you have characters that don't have traditional faces or that are missing some facial features, like a mouth. So body posture takes me to my next point, which is using the whole body. I included the sound effects lettering, these gasps and these little lines, just to point out that we shouldn't just rely on like the face and these effects to do all the work. They are going to support the expression, but the whole character should be convincing enough by themselves. So this example works better because of the movement and action of the pose. He's leaning forward, shoulders are shrugged, hands are over his mouth in astonishment, and his hair is floating behind him like he just moved quickly, and you can feel the gasp better. And the shoulders and hair really help here to make a clearer silhouette. Silhouettes are going to help a ton with making more effective poses. But there's a clear flow here compared to this one. And what helps with creating like a clear flow is going to be line of action. For those that don't know, line of action is the concept that there is a clear line that goes into a pose and gives motion to a drawing. It usually goes through the limbs and spine and helps with making a pose that flows nicely from one end to the other. So in this example, Pesky's shoulders are hunched, her hands are closer together, her tail is bent, and her hair is I even made her hair a little bit longer in this example than this one, just to make the pose flow a little bit better and make that more nicer silhouette. Another thing I like about exaggeration is that you can kind of fudge the anatomy a bit. Like in the okay example, I can notice more easily that I didn't draw these hands quite right, or these arms are a little bit fastly drawn. But in this example, I don't notice it as much because there are other things that are going on that take your attention away from that. And the point of this is more about what she's feeling rather than if the hands are drawn right. So this is really useful when you're planning out full body poses. And I usually think about this line of action in the sketch phase. So for example, in these two panels from my comic, I picked these because I think they have nice clear lines of actions, and the backgrounds are simple, so you really only have the characters to look at, and they're going to be the center of attention. In my sketches, the blue lines are where I thought about the bare minimum of the pose. Nothing about details, just only what how I want the character to fill up the space. So I usually start with a circle for the head and then sketch out the torso and which direction it will lean towards, and then draw out the line for the rest of the body and legs if applicable. And that made a strong foundation for when I move on to the next stages, like inking, putting down the flat colors, shading, and then, you know, you finally end up with the final panel. And these were, oh, sorry, I'm going too fast. And this is another like simplified representation of the lines that I was working with to create these compositions. Side note, this is one of the things I love about drawing mer people. Well, mostly because it's just really fun, but line of action makes it so much easier to work with. And poses end up looking really nice with lots of movement, since they are just kind of like one line. But having long tails or props, like these sticks that Shin and Pesky are holding, or what was I gonna say? Fins help. Even this like loose tie is useful for having lots of options, or giving yourself lots of options to make a more interesting composition. And that's my favorite thing about line of action, is that it helps you compose. And yeah, line of action helps lead your eye throughout the whole panel. Oh, sorry. And this goes back to the beginning of the line of action portion, where I said to use everything you can to effectively basically tell the story of your characters. So in these panels, the main action lines are these red counterflow lines, and that helps tell the story of him pulling her out of some kind of danger, and that's all we need. And you know, thinking about the rest of their features, like the arms, the hair, it helps fill out the rest of the panel and create a better composition. So here are a few more examples of using line of more examples of using line of action for composition. So in the first panel, Louv is offended by Lepto's handshake, which is right here. So most of the composition is directed to the left, away from Lepto's hand. And the speech bubble here kind of helps fill in any empty space. And in this panel, I really wanted things to be chaotic, because Saipho is panicking in this moment, and most of the composition is his arms flailing in all directions, but some of them are pointing towards Shin, who is just standing there statically, but leaning away from the chaos since he's kind of concerned. I wanted to come back to this drawing for a bit to kind of break down these lines and how it helps direct the eye throughout the whole image. So everyone in this image flows into each other, and it's intentional. If we start at Louv, her tail points towards Sai, and his head points towards the mirror, which is bending towards Shin, whose pose comes down towards Pesky, who's cowering right here, and her tail directs towards Levin, who is literally holding up his arms and pointing back towards this thing that came out of the mirror. And that just kind of completes a like full circle, and Sai's tail comes back to Louv. So the eye is directed throughout the whole image, and it helps people like notice details a bit easier when everyone is flowing into each other. So the whole body of each character is being used not only to explain their personality, but also carry the action. One thing that helps with that is also checking your silhouettes against a white background to make sure you can tell your characters apart effectively, so that you can see you know who this is without any of their other features to distract you. So you can tell Shin and Saifo apart because Shin has a hat, wider shoulders, long hair, legs, and Sai has shorter hair, a thinner body, tentacles. Pesky has a small frame with a different kind of tail, etc. And composition gets much easier when you have unique silhouettes to work with. And silhouettes will help with line of action, and line of action helps with characterization. So I say that you should try pushing it to the max. When you're drawing, use the sketch phase to experiment with what you can do with your poses to get your message across. So in these two panels, I wanted a lot of chaotic energy, so I played around with stretching out the characters and going for lots of movements in all directions. And they're kind of like flowing into each other here too. Speaking of stretching, I like to think about the squash and stretch technique too. Squash and stretch is it's the principle of applying a change of shape to give like a flexible feeling to your pose. So it's mostly used by animators actually, but I think it's a useful technique to apply to your own work to give life to your drawings. And it's not always the case, but I found that squash helps more for passive expressions and stretch for active expressions, simply because squash is the action of becoming smaller and stretch is like the opposite of that, it's more open. So sometimes I think about if the pose is passive or active. In these examples, Shin is shrinking away, so he is squashed in a passive motion. And in the other, his demeanor is more open, so he is stretched in an active motion. So I wanted to include this because I think this is helpful to think about if you don't know about it yet. This is a really old tutorial from the early days of Disney called the flour sack exercise. Basically, the exercise is about taking an inanimate object, in this case a flour sack, or something that doesn't have a face, limbs, or other distinguishing features, and giving it a personality. And this works, you can apply it to pretty much anything, and it will help give it some life. I think it's a good exercise to kind of practice with. This is a bit of my process that I wanted to share, where in this instance, I wasn't super satisfied with this first initial sketch of her face because I wanted her to be in a more excited mood. So I played around and eventually got this final version that I think portrays more of what I'm looking for. And I have some short time lapses of my sketching just to show you how, just to show a little bit of how I came to this result. And that, you know, it's a process, and usually I just sketch until I get something that I'm happy with. Oh yeah, so this was the final, this is the current panel that I have settled with. And she's going to be yelling, and she's going to be yelling fighting words and shooting her gun into the ceiling. And yeah, I am way more happy with this than my initial sketch. And for this, like when I was trying to figure this out, you know, it took a few like sketches to be happy. Like this actually isn't like what I ended up settling with. So, you know, I actually did lift my arm up and start like thinking about how would she be doing this action in real life. And I thought, I need to tilt her head a little bit more to show more of her mouth. And this wasn't really what I was wanting, so that's what I did. I really do think just like working it out through sketch in a process helps a lot. And acting out your poses and expressions. So, in conclusion, if your character's acting is good, you will keep readers' attention more easily. And readers respond to good acting. You want your readers to really feel whatever the characters are experiencing in the moment. My advice would be to take some time and draw expressions and poses and just push it as far as you can to see how it goes and see what is satisfying without like judging yourself. Also, looking at other artists. I do this a lot where I find other artists that are inspiring, or I really like their style, or I just like the way they do this one thing, and I just study the style to gain an understanding of how they do it and see how can I apply that to my own work. Drawing from observation is always going to help as well. And you can use a mirror, and you could keep a mirror like on your desk. It could just be like a small little compact mirror. And use it to study the way your face moves and how it naturally moves when you make the expressions that you want to draw. It's also really good for reference too. So that is all that I have. And again, my comic is Damselfish in Distress on Webtoon Canvas. And thank you guys for stopping by.
Thank you so much for doing this workshop. I definitely I've learned a lot. I think I struggle a lot with my art and my poses and my expressions looking too stiff because I care too much about like looking pretty. All these are such simple but effective tips that I think almost everyone can apply like to their own art and art
that's
style,
that's
right?
another thing, Lux. I'm glad you mentioned that. Don't be afraid of your characters not looking pretty all the time, because no one is pretty all the time. People's faces, they stretch, they scrunch, and they have imperfections. And when they are like really upset or really sad, they're usually not going to look that great. So I wouldn't worry so much about trying to keep them pretty all the time, because people are going to remember more how your character feels rather than if they were like so perfect.
So I guess that was it for today. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you so much, AndreaFishy, for taking your time to put this together. Yeah. I know it's a lot of work to like just put the whole PowerPoint together and get all the visuals for the social media posts and stuff like that, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was fun.
So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with all of us.
Thank you, Lux. You've been really kind and helpful throughout this whole thing as well.
So that was it, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, guys. Bye.